Well, I'm here once again at Lake Bled. It's a beautiful morning. Some nice thick cloud around, and according to Photopills and the photographer's ephemeris, the sun is going to come up right behind the church from this viewpoint. Now, if that's true, it's going to be quite spectacular. It's a fair bit of thick cloud there. The sun has actually risen just a few minutes ago, but there's quite a bit of thick cloud, so there's not a huge amount of colour, but there was some really nice blue hour stuff, so I'll put a couple of pictures up there that I've got already. Now, there is a break in the clouds behind there, so I'm hoping that when the sun gets high enough, it will start to break through those clouds right behind the church, and we'll get a magnificent shot. Now, the one thing about photographing at Lake Bled is there are so many great viewpoints to choose from. Sometimes it can be hard to choose. And of course, when you come here at a time like sunrise or sunset even, you have to pick a place and stick with it. Now, I've photographed all these places around here, so and I photographed from here too. I was going to go over the other side and maybe try to capture, there's a viewpoint I've shown in my previous videos, which I'll put a link up to now. There's a viewpoint over there that looks across at the castle there with the Julian Alps behind, and I was thinking of doing that this morning, but as I arrived I saw that there really wasn't that much cloud over there, and the problem is the sun is rising over there, and if there's not enough thick cloud or broken cloud or the right kind of cloud even, then I wouldn't get the colours I wanted. So I decided to come over this side. Now, I've shot from here before many times as well, so what I've also decided to do is try a vertical composition for a change. And I've got lots of landscape panoramic type shots from this viewpoint, getting the church and the castle and the mountains and everything. I've got lots and lots like that, lots of great stuff. But I realised I haven't really got that many vertical shots. So for that reason, I've decided to do a straight on shot, vertical, of the island church itself. And especially as if the sun is going to come up right behind it, it will really be something different. I got a couple of shots, horizontal shots with the sun coming up behind the island. So this time I thought, let's go for something a bit different. I'll show you the composition now and talk you through it. So here you can see the composition I've got. I'm starting to get a nice bit of colour now too. So maybe as the sun's getting higher, the colour's starting to break through. One thing you can do, it's not often I use the grid display, but in this case it was really quite useful, because by using the grid display, now you can see that I could position the church and spire right down the centre of the image and get everything nicely lined up. But of course, once you've got that done, I turn it off. Now, the next option we got are aspect ratios, and there are several aspect ratios that could work here. There's this one, the 4:3, and there's a square aspect ratio. So what I've actually done is composed the image where I could actually crop into a square, into a 4:3, or leave it as normal. It's nice that you can check these on the live view, as the clouds are changing and lots of cloud is drifting in. So I didn't want to just stick with square aspect ratio or the 4:3 in case some nice cloud came in. So I figured that if I found a composition like this, I can shoot away like this, but still be able to crop to those aspect ratios in post-processing if I want to. Now, the other problem is going to be contrast, because the sun's coming right up behind, so there's going to be a really bright background in that case. So what I've also done is, as you can see here, what I'm also done is I'm going to bracket my exposures. So I've got my nominal exposure, then I've got plus 1 2/3 stops and minus 1 2/3 stops. This way, if I need to, I can do some blending to bring back some detail in the sky or on the church itself. So the way we do that, here we go. 1, 2, 3. So if we now look, there we go. Now there's my nominal exposure, there's my darker exposure to get more detail and color in the sky, and my brighter exposure to get more detail here on the island church itself. So if need be, I can do some exposure blending in post-processing. So the magic is starting now. You can see right behind there, how the sky is getting much brighter, which indicates that the sun is actually coming up there, just as Photopills and the Photographer's Ephemeris predicted. Now, it's a waiting game. Just peeking up over that bit of cloud now, just to the right of that building on the right side of the spire. Here it comes. Beautiful. I've got an f/16, very small aperture to try to get a sun star as it comes up. And as I said, bracketing to ensure I capture all of the dynamic range. Well, I've had a quick flick through and I think I've definitely got a keeper there. So I'll take you into the digital darkroom, so to speak, and I'll show you how I'm going to process this photo. So as you just saw, the dynamic range of that scene was huge. We were shooting directly into the light where the sun was coming up right behind the island church, which means that the contrast, the difference between the brightest part and the darkest part was far too big for the camera. Well, depending on what camera you have, obviously your dynamic range is going to differ. I was shooting with a Canon 5D Mark III, which is pretty good, but still one of the older ones. Some of the newer cameras have a much better dynamic range. But still, depending on the scene, you may need to do what I just did, which was exposure bracket. Get 3 different exposures, a dark exposure, a bright exposure and a nominal exposure, and then do some blending in post-processing. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to show you a technique. There are various techniques to exposure blend, and I've done many videos on different techniques that you can use. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to do exposure blending using something called the Nik collection. Now, I was fortunate enough to get the Nik collection when Google bought it and made it available for free for everyone. They've since sold it to somebody else, and DxO I believe, and now unfortunately it's no longer free. You can do a free trial, but you have to buy it now. So if you haven't got it already, then it's worth the money. It's only 149 euros. It's well worth the money. It's a fantastic suite. It's great for doing black and white, noise reduction, a whole bunch of other things. So it's well worth getting. But that's what I'm going to use today in this video. Now, as it says here, you can use it as a plugin for Adobe Photoshop, Lightroom Classic, or as a standalone piece of software. I'm going to use it within Photoshop, so I've got it as a Photoshop plugin. Okay, and now as it goes, when you install it as a plugin, you get it in the filters section and you get access to everything here. But for the case of the exposure blending, I'm going to do it this way. If we go over to File and Automate, and here, if you've got it installed, you're going to have this option here, the Nik Collection Selective tool, which allows you to select all the different tools available. But the one above it is the simplest one, Merge to HDR Efex Pro 2. That is part of the suite. Down here you've got Merge to HDR Pro, but that's the Photoshop one, which is not as good, to be honest. So let's go up here and select that option. And what it does simply is you come here, you click Open and navigate to the file. So I've got the files ready or here, all three TIFFs. So you can see I've got the nominal exposure, the darker exposure here, and the brighter exposure. They've all been processed from RAW into a TIFF already. So I select all three and click Open, and tick this to create a smart object if you want to, and click the Merge dialog. Now let it start working its magic now. So here's our first stage. Okay, the three images have been blended. Now over here you've got the option Alignment. Now this is useful if you think that there might have been some movement between exposures, and if you check this, it will automatically try to align the images. I won't do it because I know there's no difference whatsoever between the three. I had a good sturdy tripod, there was no wind, no movement at all, and I'm 100% certain there's no movement. You'll see it if there is movement. You'll see ghosting when you zoom in, and you'll see the blended version has ghosting on it. Same thing here, image artifacts, ghosting. When you merge images together, if objects have moved, you can get this between exposures. Again, I don't need to do it, but the option is there if you want it. Chromatic aberration if you need to get rid of anything like that. Otherwise, once you're happy with all this, click Create HDR. Now, as it says here, you can use it as a plugin with Adobe Photoshop or Lightroom Classic, or you can use it as standalone software for your Mac or PC. I am using it as a plugin within Photoshop. So let's go into Photoshop. Now, I've already installed it, so it's grayed out here because I don't have a picture open, but you'll find it there typically in Filter and Nik Collection, and when you've got an image open, it will give you a list of all other things you can do. There's Nik Silver Effects, black and white, and all sorts of other things that you can do. For blending the three exposures, what I'm going to do here is go up to File, Automate, and you'll see here I've got a Merge to HDR Efex Pro 2 option. Down here you've got Merge to HDR Pro, which is the Photoshop one, which quite frankly is not very good at all. So you've got the Nik Collection Selective tool. If you open this, then you've got all the other things that you can do with it. But what I want for exposure blending and HDR is to use this Merge to HDR Efex Pro 2. So that opens this screen here, and here I can select the three images that I want to blend. So at the sunrise point, these are the three images I've chosen. I've already processed them from RAW to TIFF. So I've got my three images here. I'm going to select all three and click Open. Now I've got all three listed here in my source files. Now I can choose to create a smart object or not. I'm going to choose to create the smart filter and click Merge Dialog. So here you can see the first stage. Now it's listed the three up here, and it's shown you the nominal, and I shot it at minus 1 2/3 of a stop and plus 1 2/3 of a stop. Over here you've got options to align it. If you think that there might have been some movement between exposures, then it's worth checking this, because then the program will automatically try to align the images so that there's no mismatches. Same with this ghost reduction. Again, if there's some slight movement or even something's moved, then you'll get ghosting. So this will attempt to reduce that. I know for sure that there's been no movement between the two, that my camera was sturdy, there was no wind, and everything's fine. So I'm not going to bother with those. I'm going to leave them unchecked and click Create HDR. So this is the first stage. Now over here you've got a whole bunch of presets. You've got, if we select all of them, for example, you've got a whole load of different presets to choose from. And some of them for me are a bit too arty-farty, but if you like that kind of thing, it looks ugly. This is sometimes, I believe, where people go a bit wrong with HDR. They tend to overcook it, as they say, or overdo it. You know, you've got all these different effects which, quite frankly, I think look ugly and unnatural and just don't seem to work for me. But it's, again, creative license. It's a personal choice. I tend to go select the realistic. I tend to go for a more natural look if I can. So if we select the default here, you've got a balanced option here, and even some of these other options I think are not so good. So in this case I find the balanced option seems to have worked quite well. Then over here on the right you've got some other options that you can use. So the HDR method, for example, you can make it normal, subtle, turn it off completely, or make it strong. So depending on what you like. I quite like that normal. It's giving me a bit of vignetting in the corners to help really emphasize and draw your eye into the scene and onto the island itself. Same here with the detail. You've got realistic, again, soft, realistic, accentuated, or grungy. Ugh, horrible. So I think the realistic seems to work quite well. Same thing with drama, natural, flat, dingy. So again, I keep it natural. Down here you can make adjustments to the exposure, the shadows and highlights to make some final tweaks if you want to, and also with the contrast and the structure too, and color as well. If sometimes they tend to look a bit oversaturated, so it might be worthwhile just either pulling or adding some more color if you really want to. If they're undersaturated, I sometimes find if we take down the saturation just a touch. Same thing here, you can adjust the color temperature, you can cool it or warm it up, so it might benefit from a touch of warmth perhaps. Here, there we go. We've got more complicated control points here. I won't go into that too much. Down the bottom you've got finishing, so you've got the option if you want to add a vignette and things like that. Neutral, graduated neutral density, we don't need that here. I already had one on when I was shooting it. And again, up here, again you've got method strength, so you've got all these options that you can use. But even at that point, if you can make more adjustments in Photoshop itself. So if we come down here, I can maybe, here the highlights, that doesn't look right, so I'm gonna just double click to take it back to 0, and maybe I can take the highlights down just a touch there. That's good, like that. And if you're happy, click OK to open up into Photoshop. So once in Photoshop, if you go over to the layers palette, you can see that we've got the layer and the smart filters all applied. So you can continue to do some more complicated work on it if you want to. Otherwise, if you're happy, come over to layer and flatten the image to clear all of that. So now we've got a single image that we can work on. Now you can continue to work like this, but one thing you would notice here is in the mode, it's a 32-bit channel, and which means that some of these options are not actually available. So if you want to work away in this, that's fine. Otherwise, what I do now is I'm going to convert it to a 16-bit, and you get this little HDR toning option, so you can make some adjustments here if you want. I'm going to go with what's already been selected. Now I have a 16-bit image, and now I have all of these adjustments available to me. And another tool I use is Lumenzia. This is for luminosity masking, and it's quite useful really, because what you can do is selectively mask areas of brightness, and it's particularly useful in a scene like this because I've got a really blown out bright area here where the sun was coming up, and also in the reflection down here. So I'm going to use this a bit. I'm going to come over and select a lights, the lightest, I think, because really I want to just select the really bright parts. So the white parts are the masked areas. These are the selected areas that I can work on without affecting the rest of the areas in black here. I'm going to choose it as a selection, and if you select Control and H, now here you can see the areas that have been selected. So this is really useful, and you can turn this on and toggle this on and off. You want it off while you're working on it, really. So now if I go up to my adjustments, to my shadows and highlights, now you can see I can adjust the highlights only in those areas that have been selected and not the rest of the image. So that's really useful, because I don't want to start pulling back the highlights in on all the other parts of the image. I only want to affect these areas here. So here, there we go. I pull that back to about 20. Pull the radius back so it's not so harsh. Makes it look a bit more natural. Now I've pulled that back, so there you can see I pulled back a bit more detail down here in the reflection and here in that blown out area of the sky. I want to make that a bit harder, let's pull back the radius a touch. There we go. To do it to taste, I'm going to pull it back to about, oh, it's got zeroed somehow, sorry. There we go. So I just want to pull back some of these areas here. So that looks about right to me, that'll do this. And what I can do with that selection also is invert it like so. Turn it off again, and now I can make adjustments to the rest of the image. So now I can come to my curves and maybe just, let's see, make some tweaks to the overall contrast on the rest of the image. Just a tiny adjustment, not too much. There we go. I like that. And there's my finished image. So there's much more you can do with it, of course. It all depends on your personal taste. But that's how I'm going to do it. So now I can just simply save this as a TIFF first of all. And then I can do all the other things I need to do to prepare this image to put it up for sale or put it up on my website or whatever else I'm going to do. So now we've seen how it's done, let's go back and do one of the images I took before the sun came up. So again, we come up to File, Automate, Merge to HDR Efex Pro 2, and this time I'm going to select these three images. These are the three that I took before the sun came up. Again, they've all been processed into TIFFs. I'll tick to create a smart object and merge dialog. So here we are at the first stage. Now one thing I didn't mention earlier, which I should mention this time, is down here you can adjust the amount of blending. So you can pull it left to make it darker or pull it right to make it brighter. So this is also a quite useful tool. You know, typically it comes in the nominal, which depending on how many, I've used 3, but you could use 2 here, or you could use 5 or 6 or 7, as many as you've taken really. So this is quite useful in the sense that you could even maybe brighten the whole thing up just a touch. There we go. Okay, and create HDR. So here we are. Now I actually like this image more than the other one where the sun came up, because that was, even with the blending, you know, it's quite bright, where this one was just before the sun came up and the color was really starting to come through in the clouds. It was actually the only bit of color I got all morning, and you got a nice bit of color over here too. Again, you know, I needed to do the blending in order to bring all that out, so I really like this. So again, I tend to look at my options. These tend to look too much, so I often find the balanced works well. And we can play around with some of these if we want to. I can tweak some of the highlights perhaps. Let's take some of the highlights down just a touch, because it's still very bright in the sky there. And I think the contrast for this image is fine. There's not much else I really need to do with it actually. It's come through as very blue. Maybe you want to tweak up the white balance just a touch, so it's not too blue maybe. And there we go. I think that's good enough. So if there's nothing more you want to do at this stage, then I will then flatten the image first of all. And convert to 16-bit. Now, in this format you see it's turned ugly, so I could make some adjustments here, or I can try out some of these other methods. The exposure gamma has worked nicely, that looks better, so I'm just going to go with that. Saves a lot of time mucking around. And now I've got my 16-bit that I can work on. Now I can use Lumenzia, so let's try to select these really bright areas here. Now that's the most extreme. If I try the D, that selects a bit more. Now, let's see how that looks. So I'll make that a selection. And as you can see, we toggle Control and H, we can see what's been selected. And now I can try tweak the highlights there. As you can see, it's only affecting those bits here, but I don't think it really needs any adjustment, to be honest. I quite like it how it is, so I'm going to just get rid of that selection, and let's just oops, wrong one. Let's just do some tweaks on the overall contrast. So let's tweak the curves a bit. Down just a touch. Touch of brightness. Not too much. Just a little bit. Maybe take it up a touch. Just to brighten up the church spire a bit more. There we go. Just a tweak. There we go. That looks about right. I like that. And that's my finished photograph. I really like this. I like this one more than the other one we've just done. But I'd love to hear your opinions, so by all means please let me know down in the comments which picture you prefer, if you prefer this one or the previous picture. Now going back to where I mentioned earlier in the video about how I composed this image with the view that I could use different aspect ratios in post-processing. You saw on the screen how in the camera you can adjust the aspect ratio, and if I'd chosen a square aspect ratio, for example, I wouldn't have had the rest of the image. And the reason I went with the full aspect ratio was for this reason: clouds. Some great clouds came in, and if I'd have just stuck with the square aspect ratio, I wouldn't have recorded all the rest of it. So now I have the choice. I can keep it in this aspect ratio, or I can crop to different aspect ratios. So the way that we do that here is to go up to our rectangular marquee tool, and where it says style normal, choose a fixed ratio, and here I can set my aspect ratio. So I can make it a 5:7, for example. Now that will enable me, as you can see, it's fixed this to the aspect ratio that I've chosen. So now what I can do is I can come in here and select that. Now you can see that this image, I already cropped it in the raw file to a 5:7, so there's going to be no more adjustment here. But again, if I want to make it a square aspect ratio, let's make it 1:1. So now I can make a square selection, come in and move that into a central position and crop. So now I can have a cropped square version, and I've still captured a good bit of the cloud, so that's one option. Or I can try a different aspect ratio. I could try a 4:5. Centralize that, crop it, and I've got a 4:5 crop as well, which is quite nice too. In fact, I might save that one, so I do a save as and just make that 4:5. And then often what I'll do is I'll take a bit of time, I'll keep coming back to them, and I'll decide maybe which one I prefer. the most, but let's put the two of them side by side. See which one do you like the best? Well, now as you can see, complete cloud cover. No sun to be seen at all. But thank you, Mother Nature, for breaking that cloud up just at the right moment. Sometimes I'm sure she helps us photographers out every now and then. So thanks for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this, and as always, please give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you're new to the channel, check out some of my other videos too. And I'll stick the final image up here now, and catch you later.